Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll say good morning or good afternoon. We have a national audience today, which is very exciting for all of us. It's been quite some time since we've hosted one of our Eternal panel series, so welcome back. It's your first time. Welcome. I'll give you a little bit of a lay of the lands. First off, I am going to let you know who I am, Lisa Hickerson, Manager of Business Development for our New York office. So I will be just giving us a quick intro today. General programming, we're here together for an hour. Hopefully you're enjoying your lunch and you're gonna get some good info from our leaders around the country. The program is set to run for an hour. We'll have about 35 minutes of open discussion, and then we're gonna do 15 minutes of Q&A. I'm sure everybody at this point is very familiar with the Zoom platform. If not, at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. Please feel free throughout the program to type in whatever questions that you have, and we're going to get to as many as possible at the end. And if not, we will always follow up. I'm very excited for this discussion today. I've heard our leaders around the country have many conversations, and this is just a great summation of what the state of our industry is looking like as a snapshot today. We're going to be touching base on general market outlook, escalation, how products like soybeans are impacting our industry. Who would have thought that's going to happen? The importance of skilled labor, and ways that we're expanding our workforce just to make sure that we're sustaining as an industry, unique approaches that we're taking to eliminate waste in our job sites. And I'll say, as Charlie says, to make hard work easy. And then how critical it is to create the right environment for our workers, right, to ensure a safe work site. And then also what we're learning from the data center market and strategies that could be applied moving forward. So without further delay, I wanted to introduce today's knowledge leaders. So for a regional perspective, first off, we have Lisa Ballantyne. She's SVP from our Oakland office, here to speak about all things California. We have James Brownrigg, VP of our Houston office, to speak things Texas and the tech sector. Darian Grant, VP and GM of the Mid-Atlantic region. Kim Newshell, our VP and Business Manager of our Tampa office, to speak about Florida. And then for a more national perspective, we focus on things like sustainability and VDC, but today we're going to focus on environmental health and safety. So we have Cindy DePrater, SVP of that group from our Dallas office, really here to focus on active caring, creating the right environment, and all things safety related. And Ben Kaplan, who is the GM of our Global Critical Facilities Group, to focus on the tech sector. And last but not least, and before I hand it off, Mr. Charlie Murphy, our SVP from New York and our moderator for today. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and welcome to our panel series today. When you think about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the U.S., labor shortages, supply chain issues, inflation. When was the last time you heard the word inflation? I think it's been a generation. That was a 70s and 80s thing. There are a lot of challenges in the construction industry. So as Lisa said, we want to talk about some of those today. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to kind of give you a little feel for what's going on around the country. So Lisa, why don't we start with the West Coast? What's your market like currently and your outlook?
So for everyone, California for us, obviously there's Northern California, Bay Area, Sacramento, in Southern California, LA, Orange County, as well as my colleague Rick, who manages San Diego. We absolutely saw, the market pre-pandemic, we'll call it 2019. California absolutely saw the impact in 2020. On average in California, the market was down 10%, but it was heavily in San Francisco Bay Area, was almost down 25%, in 2020 from 19. San Diego, we'll talk a little bit about. San Diego is an interesting market. That's a strong market now that's kind of growing more than we've seen in the past. From 2020 to 21, Charlie, I'd say we were pretty flat. Once that sort of decrease happened, it was flat into this year. But we are seeing, I think we're well positioned and it's looking good for California. The Bay Area is showing from 21 to 22, probably a 10%. We'll go back sort of to almost where we were pre-pandemic in the Bay Area. Sacramento is going to stay strong. A lot of public work going on in the capital. San Diego, I'll mention briefly because it's a big life science sector. There's a lot going on residential in San Diego. That's usually a $2.5–3 billion market. that may see 3.5, 4 billion, as we go into 22 and 23.
Mhm.
And then LA Orange County is back strong too. They're back to almost pre-pandemic when we get to 22 with additional growth, coming our way. So we definitely felt that valley. I think if you ask anybody, but I know we're going to talk a little bit more about work, manpower, and supply chain, and some of those pressures will be felt in California as we move into 22, 23, 24.
That's encouraging. Thanks, Lisa. Let's switch coast. Darian, how's the Mid-Atlantic looking?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Charlie. And similar to what happened on the West Coast, we also saw somewhat of a bump in the road here as we really grappled with the pandemic. But really, as you look at where we are in 20 and shifting over to 21, we're definitely seeing an increase in the market. But the good news here in the Mid-Atlantic area is that, work really never stopped here in Mid-Atlantic. We were deemed as being essential services within the construction industry. So, our markets, education market, K-12, higher education, the work continued. Healthcare, the work continued. The federal government, the work continued. Municipal work, the work continued. We saw a little bit of a slowdown in the commercial sector and the retail sector, as well as hospitality. But the good news for us in Mid-Atlantic is the robust data center market. And when I say robust, we'll talk a little bit more about this with Ben Kaplan and the work that Brown Rig is doing across the company. But we continue to push forward. So as we shift gears from 21 to 22, we're going to continue to see an increase. And I think we're going to probably go up another 10 to 15% from where we are right now. So we're seeing that steady growth. And it's a reflection of just how diverse the market is. It's a pretty robust, but again, the data center market is what's really driving and sustaining the marketplace here in construction in the Mid-Atlantic area.
Thank you, Darian. Kim, how are things in Florida?
Hey, Charlie, thanks. Similar to what you saw out west in Lisa's region, Florida, you saw some decreases. We've got a couple of different business units, 2 in Central Florida, 1 in Orlando and 1 in Tampa, and then we've got Miami. And across Florida, between the 3 business units, we saw a decrease 2.5% to 5% from 19 to 20, and about 6.5% to 11.5% from 20 to 21. What we did see is that the healthcare and education markets held fairly even during that period, but commercial and manufacturing and infrastructure took hits ranging from anywhere from 2 to 12% since 2019. So what we're seeing for the future in the non-residential market is expected to climb back and increase about 2.5% to 7% depending on region, or actually 4 to 8% from 21 to 22. And then from 22 to 23, we're seeing anywhere from a 2.5% to 7% rise. But we're not expected to bounce back from pre-COVID condition until probably late 23, early 24. And some potential barriers to that growth that we're envisioning or expecting, we mentioned it a little earlier, are, significant worldwide supply chain issues and labor demands and things like that. So, multifamily housing and mixed use development markets are exploding down here in Florida. As you can imagine, a lot of folks from the Northeast moved down here, and the communities are getting ready. Infrastructure upgrades are on the rise to accommodate. And so we're seeing a lot in education and housing.
Okay, thank you. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of mixed. It doesn't sound as robust as Southern California. Here in our New York market, things have been a little hesitant because of the lack of the people returning to the office buildings. Depending on what articles you read, we're anywhere between 30 and 40% back to our occupancy levels, current occupancy levels. Before the Delta variant, we all thought that by September, October, we would be back to 80 to 90%. So, but the good news is that the big employers like Google are still continuing to build product or build offices that they want to bring their employees to. That's encouraging in our market. Ben, you have a market without borders across the country. What are you seeing on the tech front?
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you everybody for allowing us to share with you a little bit today. In general, as we look from 19 to 20, the only impact we saw in the market at that point was our COVID protocol response. The work never stopped. So we're basically stayed pretty flat in 20, and then have seen tremendous growth in 21. The market's grown almost 50%, and we see 2022 seeing very similar growth, and that pipeline is pretty active through at least 2025. The really interesting, I think, for the probably the audience here would be, we started data centers in 23 geographic business units in 2021. So while there are certainly some large ones that have very big impact when you look at some of the hyperscalers, there is data center work pretty much happening across the country, and a broad participation.
Interesting. As we hear about this growth, whether it's in the tech centers or in our own regions, we are still going to be challenged, as Lisa said at the very beginning, from labor and supply chain issues. Let's talk about labor. Let's focus on that. Jim, in your market, what's the availability of qualified labor?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking some time to join us today. Charlie, when we talk about labor, we really have 4 independent markets in Texas, similar to Lisa's comment about the market conditions in California. And the labor conditions, while we do share some labor throughout Texas, the reality is each market's unto itself. And we're continuing to be pressed, if you will. Our market conditions between 19 to 20, obviously a little pause or slowdown, but back pretty strong in gangbusters fashion, if you will, in Austin. The residential market, thanks to some of the folks from our East and West Coast headed to Texas, the Austin market continues to be strong, and labor is really becoming a concern in Austin and the San Antonio. That I-35 corridor is really stretched right now. I would say Houston with oil and gas, percolating to come back would be a concern. And then Dallas, the overall commercial market there has returned. So it's a little spotty, but we'll continue to be challenged throughout 22 and into 23. It's a big challenge for our industry overall, right? How do we continue to bring skilled labor and into our industry, and frankly maintain those that joined our industry and may have left during COVID?
Right. How about in the West Coast, Lisa?
I mentioned, Charlie, the more we started talking about this topic, and I think, Jim, you brought up something when we talked earlier, really, even about hiring practices. The AGC came out and said, 64% of California construction companies or trade partners have actually even changed their hiring and training and scheduling kind of to make some draws to get more people in. We are seeing on the West Coast, I'd say the national numbers, unemployment in construction was down, right? Heavily down in 2020 and into 21. But now I think what we're really seeing, and we're seeing it as we're looking to, buy projects that are starting in 22 and 23, we aren't seeing necessarily that shortage immediately. Some of the jobs I've heard, on the street, there is a little bit of pressure for sure starting, but we're absolutely seeing as we go into 22 and 23, a real challenge on capacity, skilled workers. So there's a lot of things going on. I think other people will speak to that a bit, but we are hearing those same practices happen. And really what we're doing is trying to make sure that we're educating our customers on when's the best time to procure. There's a lot of design build work in California. That is a very typical trend, both in MEP design build, as well as design build full blown. So getting early engagement and locking in on that trade partnership, that labor, making sure you have that qualified staff. We are speaking specifically on those topics on timing. And it's getting really important to do that. I'd say in all of our markets on the West Coast.
It sounds like labor's tight in Texas and tight in California. How's the Mid-Atlantic looking, Darian?
Pretty much the same. I love the word that Jim used when he said pressed. The Mid-Atlantic labor market is extremely pressed. In addition to what we see as the typical market segments, such as healthcare and education, having a very strong steady state, the data center market has grown significantly. And when Ben Kaplan, shared those percentages in terms of growth, a significant amount of that is right here in the Mid-Atlantic area. And so, it's really pressed as a result of, the increased data usage. And so the data center projects, they really commandeered the labor market. I mean, completely. So the owners of the projects, they want the projects faster because the infrastructure really can't keep up with the actual data demands right now. So they want projects faster. So it's longer work days. They want their projects faster. So the workforce, they're actually going where the money is. I mean, so the data center projects, they're attracting that labor force. So it's extremely strained. And we're seeing where, a lot of the projects, they're pulling folks from south of the border, from the Carolinas, where labor wages are a little bit lower. They're coming up here into the Virginia space and DC and into the Maryland space where they can, garner higher wages.
Interesting. So they're traveling to where the money is.
That's what we're seeing.
Kim, this what we're seeing with labor, the lack of labor, do you think this was something exacerbated by the pandemic, or was this pre-existing in your market?
I definitely do think, based on what we're seeing in the market, it was exacerbated by the pandemic. The availability of workforce is well below average. Where we were accustomed to securing any reasonable number of laborers, framers, hangers, et cetera, within 24-hour period pre-COVID. It's more difficult to secure not just skilled labor, but just general labor force. We're seeing productivity loss, absenteeism, supply chain impacts, and others are having the ability or an impact on the labor staff's ability to perform work. So we saw that the pandemic removed a large number of workforce from the market, and two principal factors based on our labor conversations were the government subsidies for unemployment and pandemic relief provided some financial stability for our workforce to not come to work, right? And to be able to maybe moonlight on side jobs of their own as opposed to in their pre-COVID employment. Also, companies like Publix and McDonald's and restaurants alike were offering sign-on bonuses. So in lieu of going into the labor workforce, they went into the service industry instead. And then another factor that we saw is just a fear of COVID-19 in general that the workforce had. They were on edge and uncertain about, coming to work and possibly spreading the virus to their families. So, and then the final thing I just would share is that, on projects with mandated vaccine requirements, depending on the trade partner, we were seeing anywhere from 30 to 40% loss of labor, and we're having to juggle crews. And so what ends up happening is, the labor force that we have is having to work more hours, to achieve schedule milestones, and the labor shortage is having a big factor on our workforce today. So it's, how we attract and retain, is two couple things, having constant work, not having starts and stops, constant volume of work where we can have multiple jobs at various stages in development, where they know there's job certainty, they're more apt to stick around. And then also we're having to pay unskilled workers, they're demanding skilled worker wages. And so, elevated wages is also kind of an impact of that and not having enough workforce. So it's across the board, and, we've got a lot of work to do to get them back.
Right. Darian, I was wondering, you work in a merit shop environment. Is the lack of labor more prevalent with union versus non-union contractors? You see anything there?
So it's pretty much the same. I mean, the strain on the market right now, it's across the open market as well as the the union projects as well. And I'll tell you this, it's interesting. For one of the projects in particular, we were just sitting down with the client, and we started doing some planning, and we reached out to the electrical contractor to talk about the robust amount of electricians needed for the project, and they shared with us that the halls were pretty much empty. And so we had a chance to reach out and talk with the electricians hall. And, what they shared with us was that, they have over 150 requests for electricians that they simply cannot fill right now. That is significant. And that's what we're seeing right here in the marketplace.
Wow. So Cindy, we're hearing about all these labor shortages. What can we get to workers or do to get workers to come to our jobs?
And again, that is a fantastic question, because everything you're hearing out there is about the worker. And so I could go into a lot of different things, but the one thing I'm going to focus on that I think is truly having an impact is creating the right environment. It's a keystone. It's a strategic priority for us. It's part of our overall business strategy. And obviously it's just the right thing to do. Everything that we do, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, but everything that we do around creating the right environment is very purposeful. And I'd say it's very intentional. You know, it creates a harmonious, inclusive, safe, and respectful workplace. And you do that, you know, with the workers, not to the workers, but for the workers. You're creating an environment that leads to higher functioning teams, retention, attraction into the industry, and just overall job satisfaction. So we have something called active caring. I'd like to focus on that for just a minute. You know, there's a lot of things, and some of them are so simple to do, but creating that right environment is about actively caring for these workers and, you know, setting up job sites that have, you know, safety, good parking, hot and cold running water, enough microwaves where they can have a hot lunch, conditioned break areas, healthy food options. And it doesn't stop there. We bring in, you know, health and wellness trailers, and we don't just bring in someone to do stretch and flex. We bring in trained physical therapists who are there all day long to help these workers. You know, we accommodate languages. You heard some of the folks on the call talk about, you know, the workers are coming from everywhere now. And I think we see that as something that's going to happen for a long, long time. So we're going to have to accommodate so that they understand and that they feel included. Gosh, what else do we do? Let me mention just a couple of other things. We actually focus more training now. You heard we're bringing people into the industry that don't maybe know construction. And so that does create unique challenges for safety. But we're focusing on the crew leads. We're bringing in people to talk to them about their leadership skills and giving them more opportunity, even within their own companies when they don't work for us. We bring in outside speakers with, you know, who are going to bring that exceptional engagement to the worker. They're inspirational. They, you know, and it can be anything. We give away a lot of stuff, but I think focusing on those crew leads, treating those workers with respect, is what's bringing people to Turner. And again, these are simple things to do, but they go so far with these workers.
That's great stuff, Cindy. And you know, I've been in the industry a long time, and just to see how we've changed, to see how we're finally recognizing that the work doesn't get done without that worker, and giving them all the respect and the right environment for them to flourish and grow is really key to our success.
Well, and we're seeing that translate into lower incident rates. You know, during COVID, our numbers went way, way down because we were reimagining work, reimagining active caring. And how do we reimagine that work to work further apart with COVID PPE? All of those things have created a safer workforce.
That's great to hear. Ben, you know, we've heard about this declining labor availability, and Cindy's come up with some ways to attract workers. What other countermeasures is the tech group doing to bring more people into the workforce?
Yeah, a couple different approaches, and all happening simultaneously, just due to the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing. You know, one thing is recognizing that it used to be our labor pools were primarily local and then somewhat regional. And as was mentioned by others, it's really become a national market, and we're really competing for labor, especially skilled labor, across a much broader marketplace. So some of the things we're doing, you know, one is really working hard on workforce development programs. And what's really kind of interesting about this is this is even with the breadth of Turner, this is too big an issue for us to solve. So there's a lot of collaboration with our other industry partners, clients, and general contractors to look at these programs and work on them together to just make our industry attractive to people. So there's some pretty robust and aggressive things that we're doing in collaboration, again, across the industry. Another thing we're doing is really having some open, honest collaboration with organized labor, because that is the single biggest source of labor that we have. and really approaching it as a partnership and being creative and really understanding from their perspective what is important. Everything that Cindy talked about around active caring and the environment for that worker. We're working much differently to try and create that collaboration and attract both new people in the industry and folks to our projects. We're having a much more detailed conversation with specialty contractors and getting creative about how even they collaborate. And I think that theme keeps coming up here. It's about collaboration. Looking where, in the past, maybe you'd hire a specialty contractor to do a scope of work. Now we're looking at it, how do you get multiple specialty contractors to work together on a particular project to meet the needs and pool resources to meet the requirement. And this also has an added benefit. It's allowing us to introduce more and more diversity into the process, both diverse contractors and hopefully a more diverse labor force. And then another major focus is looking at off-site and near-site fabrication. What can we do to move some of that productivity off of the traditional construction site into environments that are safer, potentially more productive, more interesting to people? Because somebody may not want to work on a job site in January in the winter, but would be willing to do productive work in a factory, more of a factory environment, will help us attract people to the industry. So these are just some of the creative things that we're doing at scale to meet the need of the labor force.
And Charlie, is it okay if I jump in for 1 second? Just, I hope it's okay not to pile on, but only when I was listening to Ben, I know we've got a lot of people on the call and we've got a lot of owners, and I just want to point out too, that engagement from the owners on some of those programs and some of the things, when we talk about what attracts people to Turner, it's really like Turner and our customers, our clients and our partners. And that's been a really important piece, I would say. And I don't think this is just California, but everything Ben talked about, even when it talks to who some of those trade partners are, as our clients are expecting more too from themselves and from other people, everything from how the project is procured. Again, I talk a little bit about design build. I know that's a little West Coast California heavy topic, but really that engagement, that attracts trade partners. It also, the need for more underrepresented companies to be participating. When our clients, that's a great, we do that as a goal anyway, but when the clients and the projects actually really engage in that community, all of a sudden our pool of subcontractors and trade partners becomes broader. We can break packages up into smaller components, but it takes active participation by all involved to actually get that engagement. So I just want to make sure, it's not just and I know we all know, but to say it out loud, this is not just about Turner or our competitors. Our owners are really being thoughtful about how they partner with us to make our projects and their projects the most attractive in the marketplace. And I think that's going to, be very important going into, again, whether it's 22, I think I heard a lot Q3, Q4, and then 23, we're all hopeful, right? It's great to be busy. But how do we be busy safely, efficiently, productively? And we have a lot of owners that are really part of that discussion.
It's interesting to bring up the owner side because they can make a big difference whether on our projects and how we approach things. Jim, in your market has, we have other means to reduce labor. How is your owner, and what are some of the things that you've looked at help reduce or help offset these labor issues?
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I think it's I'll repeat a couple of things: collaborative and inventive, right? The opportunity to move to offsite construction or DFMA and really try to drive a more productive environment that we're prefabricating entire elements or spaces. We've been at our industry for some time has been at prefabricating systems or elements, but really moving to entire spaces or environments are creating unique opportunities for us to work collaboratively across multiple trade partners to deliver unique spaces. I think one of the things we've hit on with labor. Labor's a challenge we can see. Supply chain's a challenge we haven't seen that well. So, Charlie, I think our focus is really starting to move to managing or mitigating the risk associated with supply chains. There's a lot of items or issues in front of us that we've not normally contemplated. I started my career in the manufacturing industry for an electrical manufacturer, and I see lead times today I've never seen in my career. And those lead times are driving huge impacts to projects. So the ability, Lisa talks about design build. I think we're very, very soon needing to get to the space of talking how quickly can we get design done around long lead equipment or materials that are impacting our schedule. So I think that there's an intersection between labor and supply chain that we have to pay even more attention to. Lisa mentioned at the outset a comment about soybeans. For 30 years, mineral oil was the typical dielectric or insulating fluid in liquid filled transformers. A little bit I know that had actually moved and changed to FR3, which is with soybean oil. And if any of you watch the commodity markets, soybean oil is twice the price it's been historically. And now we're seeing price increases. We think of transformers, we think of copper, right? That's going to drive the price. Not anymore. It's core steel and soybean oil. So I think it's being just as creative in the supply chain space, or even more so than it is in labor. And how do we bring those two things together to get something harmonious that's going to meet the scheduled demands of our projects?
I'm glad you brought up the supply chain issues, because that's certainly one of the major headlines that's going on, both with just the industry in general and our personal lives, as well as on our professional lives. If we were to just ask a quick update, Lisa, what are you seeing as impacts to supply chain issues on your projects?
I won't repeat, but Jim, MEP equipment for sure. Jim, I think you're seeing all the same. That's a national, we're all getting them from the same plants in manufacturing. Everybody hates when we mention this one, but exterior wall, glazing, curtain wall. I mean, that right now we're seeing, I love it. We've got some beautiful projects on the West Coast, very complicated. Our competitors have very complicated, beautiful projects. The supply chain, so it's capacity, again, for those trade partners. But if you're talking directly to them, they're talking about where are you sourcing those products from. It does matter if it's from Europe, if it's from Thailand. So it's the typical things. I think we've talked about curtain wall for years, my whole career. But now I think what Jim brought up, it's really tricky. We're trying to make sure that we're engaged more directly in knowing exactly where things are coming from, 2 or 3 tiers down, to ensure that we've got all of that sequenced and planned into the construction schedule, and guiding, helping to guide some of our design partners, informing them accurately, because I do think there's a lot of responsibility for us to help inform those designs to make sure that not only are they beautiful, but they can be done in time and with highest quality. So those are the 2 big. We always see, we have a stone situation going on one job where hopefully we'll get out of that, Charlie, from the pandemic, some of the pandemic stuff where we had some quarantine issues that lingered. But, those to me, the MEP and the exterior wall are the highest priority right now on our projects that we're launching.
So Ben, how are you advising our clients with these issues that we're facing?
I think one of the key conversations we're having is about transparency. As these lead times extend further and further out, it's important for us with our vendors and our trade partners to create visibility as far out as we can, to make decisions as early as we can, and lock in those materials well ahead of when we think we need them. We're in the data center side, we really have 2 issues. One is just the incredible expansion and the amount of work, and most data centers are made up of the same basic components. So we would be having a supply chain conversation regardless of any of the pandemic related supply chain disruptions, because demand is just up faster than capacity has been able to grow. Then you add the disruption element into the supply chain, and it's really exasperated the problem. So from that regard, we really talk about, again, that transparency, getting out as far as we can, making decisions as early as we can. And then there's also, it goes back to that collaboration. We have to be nimble. When we have situations like we had in Texas earlier in the year, where some of those factories that are producing product got shut down immediately, and it wasn't like we see a hurricane coming next week, we can slowly shut down and get everything safed off and then restart. We lost a week. Production got shut down mid operation. Equipment got ruined. Things had to be recommissioned, restarted. New equipment had to be bought. Major disruptions in things like roofing. And when you're building, some of our buildings are 1 million square foot under roof. That's a big issue. And figuring out how to adapt in the middle of that when you don't really even have time to prepare. That's about collaboration and being nimble and working with our clients, working with our other partners to figure out how to work through those issues and stay on track.
A lot to do. Cindy, we've talked about equipment availability and things like that, but we still have to run our jobs safely. There's still COVID out there. There's testing. What's being impacted along those lines with the supply chain issues?
Well, it's everything that everybody's already experienced, and probably will experience when we get to the testing mechanism. With so many people needing the COVID test, there's going to be a shortage of that, and we're going to have to deal with that. The big things that I see right now are just making sure you have enough PPE on hand. If you're talking about just equipment, tools, and material, maybe you have to order it and procure it much more quickly, which means you have to store it until it needs to be used. Make sure that it's in good shape. But that creates additional risk. When we're saying that delivery is not coming on time, what we see is the workers being rushed. And, they may be right in the middle of an operation and have to stop because the delivery showed up 3 days later and they weren't even sure when it was going to come up. So, making sure there's a good solid plan for dealing with the safety of unloading and storing. We're having to create better areas of access and egress to make sure that the workers have good access and egress, and all that material that when it does finally come in doesn't get stacked in one place. Again, we're double, triple handling material, which creates opportunity for workers to be hurt. I think there's a couple of good things. I don't want to always focus on the negative aspects of the supply chain, but, COVID has really forced us to be, Jim said it, innovative. The use of robotics and AI and wearable technology to improve the density of a project or the stacking of trades, development of software that, although some of the material we need or the developers we need has been slowed down by the supply chain, it's created opportunities for us to dive deeper into technology-based solutions that allow us, again, to create a safer environment. So anything we can do to take advantage of this and create opportunities, but the big thing is going to be making sure you have enough PPE tools and equipment, and that it's not inferior quality, that it's not counterfeit, and making sure you have it on hand for the workers when they need it. Really important.
Got it. It's interesting that you raised about when equipment shows up late. One of the things that we've seen, oftentimes we create less safe working conditions when the sequence of work changes.
Mm-hmm.
And when things show up late, then that's a whole different condition that the worker needs to deal with. So just adapting to those is something we all have to be nimble with.
Well, and we're making time for that 2-minute plan. It's when something comes up and it needs to be planned. If something's out of sequence, stop for 2 minutes and replan the effort, because that's where we see the accidents really happen, is when someone doesn't replan for the work.
Exactly. So going forward, Kim, what are you doing differently for 2022 than you did this past year for these issues?
So I think with the supply chain issues that we're seeing and the labor shortages, there are a few things that we're trying to focus on, predominantly because there's, let's take supply chain, for example, with the shortage of materials. Take metal framing, for example. Used to be 2 to 3 week lead times on metal framing. We're at 6 to 8 weeks now. Mineral wool insulation went from 3 to 4 weeks to 4 to 6 months, right? So we're focusing on getting materials in the pipeline sooner, making decisions. We're working with clients and our design partners to, get the submittals right the first time, better quality control. A lot of material shortages can be avoided with, not having to do rework, right? So if we do better quality control on our job sites, we don't have to throw material away, order new materials and things like that. I think we're leaning on our trade partners a little bit more across, the regions and the nation to see what they're seeing and maybe share information on resources and what supply stores they may have. Turner's actually pretty fortunate. We're a national company, and we can benefit from learning from each other what we're each seeing, and we can bounce ideas off of each other. But even more so, we have the advantage of SourceBlue, which helps us understand our supply chain challenges in real time, and we're focused on it a lot. And we had a situation here, a client of ours here in Florida was working on something out in Arizona, and they didn't have material, and they had to open this healthcare facility, and they reached out to us, and we were able to lean on our SourceBlue partners and see if they could track down some of this roofing material. And we were able to do it. A project was put on hold in another region of the company or another region in the country, and we were able to, secure that material for that client. And so just, and Ben said it and Jim said it, and we're talking about a lot, just transparency, building decision-making timeframes into our schedules, right? Working with our clients and design partners. So all of these little things, they add up. We can be a little bit more proactive on quality control, like I mentioned, and just understanding where the market is and where we can help find other materials. So the more we share and the more we're transparent with each other, that's how we're going to all be successful. So those are the kind of things that we're working on to make sure that we've got sufficient workforce, supply chain, things like that.
That's good. That's pretty comprehensive, and I'm glad you mentioned about SourceBlue, because they've helped us in New York also trying to expedite materials, whether it's for, as you say, whether it's one of our projects or a past client has asked us, can you help us out? So we've definitely experienced that, and SourceBlue has been a great resource for us with our customers. Darian, not all of our jobs are negotiated. A lot of times we do lump sum bid. I know your market probably is a fair amount. Are there things you're doing differently on your lump sum bid projects in the future to deal with these supply chain issues?
Yeah, so fortunately, we have a balance between those lump sum opportunities and the projects where we GMP the projects and we have the opportunity to get in early. And I mean, on those GMP projects, I could just basically say ditto to everything that Kim just shared. I mean, it was very comprehensive. The one thing that I will add is just, we were awarded a project back in perhaps February, March of this year, and we won't GMP until probably the end of Q3 next year. And so being at the table early, it really afforded us the opportunity to really work as a true partner with our client. I mean, getting that, as the design has begun to evolve, sitting down with the trade partners, this trade contracting community, we were able to just really, with the design at the table, talk about, some of these design features and elements and get real-time feedback immediately from our trade partners and share that with the client. It's actually helping them make decisions in the design process instantaneously. And so that's really helping us in this process, and it's helping set the clients up for success. So I think the continued word here this morning, or this afternoon rather, has been collaboration and transparency. As we can get more of that into everything that we're doing, it's going to help us set our clients up for success. Even on the lump sum projects, we still have to come to the table with that degree of transparency and allow our clients to still make decisions and make sure that they understand what's happening in the supply chain process. And sometimes they have to call an audible. So they have to make decisions on what's happening based upon, what's happening and the disruption in the supply chain process. And so we're seeing clients, make those decisions. And again, with the trade partners at the table, we can help them make the best and most efficient decision that they can make that's in the best interest of the project.
Well, that's really a great summary of what we've been hearing from the others. is that collaboration, working with your clients, working with the trade partners, get in early, use all the resources, respect the worker, create that right environment. That's a great summary of all those things. Nellie, we're at 12:46. I know there's some questions out there you want to get to, so.
Absolutely. So thanks, Charlie. So thanks everyone for the great conversation. I'm Nellie Vasquez, Business Development Manager for New York. We want to get into some questions. The first two are around modular and manufacturing. So these are not to anyone in particular, so feel free, anyone, to jump in. So the first is, how is modular construction affecting building economics? And where has it been successful and where has it been unsuccessful? What are some of the challenges?
Why don't we start with Jim on that one? I know he's had a lot of modular experience in his market.
Sure, thanks, Charlie. Great question. And I think maybe a little history in where modular has evolved, right? It's come at us in a number of different avenues and different vertical markets, if you will. I'll go back to where it's worked is, I think, where you've been able to integrate the existing supply chain or existing markets with existing trade partners, if you will, with construction. So the concept that we needed to move towards is, how do you design around modular? How do you design around manufacturing and assembly versus how do you take a designed building and then try to make it modular? So it's working when we are designing around modular elements. It's not working when you take a traditional design and try to split it apart. Now, I'm not saying you won't get value there. You can get value, and by doing a modular around systems, whether that be MEP systems or whether that be around a wall system. Not to say there's not value there, but the big value is when you can drive the design around modular elements that a supply chain exists to be able to solve that problem or provide that product.
And Jim, if I can just add to that from an economic standpoint, Nellie, what we're seeing is where you gain the most economic benefit from modular is if there's a lot of repetition of similar spaces, right? You lose the advantage of the economical benefit if you've got one-offs in every situation. And so I think that, that needs to be taken into consideration. And Jim said it right. You've got to make the decision to go modular from the get-go in terms of design, or you lose the schedule benefit up front of, going to a modular delivery method to begin with. So those are the two things, just want to make sure, we discuss a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, Kim, to the next question about what are the conversations that we're having now to challenge or to collaborate with manufacturers to help speed for productivity, promote safety. We talked a lot about the scarcity of skilled labor, right? How do we help mitigate that? And what are the current conversations that are happening? And are there any specific sectors that those conversations are happening in? That was a mouthful, I know. Sorry.
That was a lot, and I'll ask Lisa, in your market, are there things that you're doing to work?
Yeah,
with
and I was like,
manufacturers?
I think Ben Kaplan has a good something to say.
Okay.
So I'll think to Ben next. That kind of led that question. If we understood it correctly, Nellie, it's not just about modular, right? It's about prefabrication. And as we were talking about supply chain, I was kind of smiling, not because I'm happy about it, but our awesome moderator here, Charlie Murphy, I bet would also weigh in on, we're trying to be a lean company, and just-in-time delivery has been like what we've been trying to do from a housekeeping perspective. And so all of these things kind of come together, that question around what are we doing to, whether it's modular or prefabrication. I mean, I think that's huge. Well, what can we do off-site in a safe environment where everything is at, a lower level, not reaching, we're totally engaged with our trade partners. I think that's now standard practice for a lot of major trade partners in some of those facilities where even if you're not at modular, prefabrication isn't quite, you might not be at modular, but you should be at more prefabrication, skids, whatever those products, also architecturally as well, not just MEP. So that will help increase efficiency. That will help increase productivity. It also is a safer work environment. If we can make things at a level that's safer for people to perform them, we're not going to have inefficiencies. God forbid something happens. That's like 0% of 0% allowed, right? Is like, don't do anything that would ever cause injury to someone. So I think that's, you know, again, not maybe unique to California, but I would say there's a lot of great sophistication within our MEP trades here in California. I feel totally blessed by that, where they're actually driving it as well. It's not just general contractors. It's a lot of our trade partners, proud to call them partners out here, because they are a lot of the answer to some of those questions, Nellie. So I don't want to punt to my moderators, but I know Ben probably has something. And Charlie, I'd be curious from you are our lean guru as well. I love that. I've learned so much from you. I think this is a challenging time for that. We're doing things that we typically wouldn't do. We want product somewhere versus have it when it is needed. So it sort of has changed a moment of the dynamic that we're living in.
Yeah, I think, Charlie, if I could just add to what Lisa said before you go. One thing where the efficiencies get maximized with modular and prefab also is, you know, you're working in a safer environment, yes, but you also have skilled, trained workers who do the same task over and over again. So, you know, you take the having multiple crews and having to retrain over and over again out of the equation. And so there's less of a learning curve with the the prefab and the modular. So that's an added bonus. Not only are you working in a safer environment, a controlled environment, you're guaranteed work hours because you're not dealing with the rainy season in Florida, for example. You also have the advantage of, you know, the skill set and, not having to retrain each different crew to make the schedule. It's all being done by the same people every time, and you have some assurance in that quality.
And so I'm just going to go off on a little different tangent, because although we're talking about prefab, you know, Lisa kind of set up for the lean part of this. So if you think of a construction site as a giant factory, what can we do to take waste out of the production stream? And so, like a simple example that we have, we're doing an office tower here in New York. Something as inconsequential as getting the deck ready for a turnover to pour concrete, that we were able to, by working with the curtain wall contractor, get their embeds in earlier through a variety of things, and which took a day out of reduced our pour schedule by a day. And you think of a pour schedule by a day times 66 days, it's a lot of time. Because of some of the lean things that project did, we were able to absorb the hits from the pandemic stop of work and still be able to deliver that project on time. That the team has set up co-learning, is what we're calling it, co-learning opportunities with some of our subcontractors, the curtain wall contractor, the drywall contractor, which has resulted in their identifying waste, reducing. And that's also another way when you take less time to do something, because you're doing it more efficiently, it's inherently safer. You solve some of the labor shortage issues, quality's better. So there's a number of benefits. And so although it's not prefab like we were talking about, it's another tool that we're using. I know, Jim, you're using it in some of your data center projects to go reduce that repetitive work to make it safer and make it safer and higher quality, and picking up time for those data center projects.
Thanks, Charlie. So we had a few questions come in around de-risking the immediate future, whether it be pricing, whether it be schedule. So can you talk a little bit about what your respective regions or Turner as a whole does when we talk about risk assessment, escalation in pricing, availability of long lead? Kim gave that great example of SourceBlue earlier, but more holistically, what can you give insight for there?
Why don't we ask Ben? You have a number of clients you deal with on a national level who are experiencing this both in the construction sites and probably in their manufacturing side. What are you doing with them?
Yeah, so the theme in our industry is predictability around schedule and predictability around cost, because speed to market is very important in the technology world, especially right now. So again, I think a lot of these themes are recurring. how do you look at your supply chains? How do you provide as much transparency around that? How do you understand what the cost drivers are when you're looking at cost certainty, and allow decisions to be made in a way that we can provide that certainty and cost? When do we have to decide? How do we lock in supply? Once we lock in the supply, what do we do with that supply? Do we have to store it? Do we have to take delivery and store it? And does that create some cash flow issues? So there's a whole bunch of parallel courses on that. The innovative side around looking at parallel construction paths, which is where the offsite or near site construction also comes into play. It takes out sort of some of the traditional risk of weather, for instance, that Kim, I think you mentioned, and being a big issue in Florida, but it also helps us deal with the newer issues that we're facing, which are just the availability of labor at the time that you need it, or when you talk about just-in-time delivery for materials. That was a great model in 2019. It's not such a great model in 2021. If you expect things to show up exactly when you need them, it's really hard to maintain that certainty. So really rethinking how we interact. And a piece of that ties to earlier things too is let's make sure let's stay lean and make sure people are doing what's important. Let's make sure the designers design just what we need, so we can go into prefabrication. Don't over design it. We don't want to have to reverse engineer a design in order to facilitate this process, as Jim mentioned, under DFS SMA, Design for Safe Manufacturing and Assembly. How do we build our means and methods into the design from the very beginning, both the means and methods and the sources of supply? When you work all of those things in combination, Nellie, I think that's where we start to zero in on the answer to the question you just asked.
Great, thanks. So we've got 2 minutes, and this is the crystal ball question that was put out there. So the question is, with the supply chain issues that we're seeing all over the news and in papers, what's your advice for when discussing pricing and scheduling with clients? Is it wait it out for 18 months and wait for the kind of tide to die down, or is the tide going to be where it's at? What do you tell your client? Is there any upside right now to building in this current climate? 2 minutes. So
go ahead, Lisa, you start.
I think it's where are you talking? I mean, I bet we all have a different answer for our regions potentially. I would say right now for us, I wouldn't wait it out. If you want to have something that starts, because I don't see that it ends 48 months from now. I think there is a little bit of get those major trade partners that are going to have capacity issues in 23. Talk to them if you're really interested, and use whoever your general contractor is, right? Hopefully it's Turner, but if it's someone else, have that partnership with them to actually deliver the best CBA, do a choosing by advantage, use some options to really get some of those things in play. I think right now for us in California, just speaking California, right now, I worry more about 23 being a little bit more challenging. I think if you don't do that, then you're probably too far out. So I'd say work with your partner that you're working with, whoever you're doing pre-construction with, have transparent conversations. Every job and every location is going to be a little bit different, but you might want to be a little bit creative, and you might want to think about how can you lock in some things now to avoid some of that volatility.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. So with that, we're at 1 o'clock. And I want to thank everyone for their time today and for all the great questions that came in. Look out for us early next year, where we'll be talking about sustainability. Thanks again, everyone. I hope everyone stays dry and be safe.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care.